Hello, and today I'm going to show you how to make Cinnabon cinnamon rolls. And these are made with active dry yeast, and we will be pretty much following all 10 stages of yeast bread production. All right. So this is a very high technique recipe. So we're going to actually be dividing this over the course of 2 days. So today you're going to see how to activate the yeast and how to make your dough. All right. And then tomorrow you'll see how to make your filling, how to shape your cinnamon rolls, and then how to make a creamy glaze. All right. So it is divided into 2 days. So without further ado, let's get started. So you can see that I've projected your recipe on the screen. So you can see the ingredients for dough. We'll be using dry yeast. We'll be activating that with warm water. We'll be combining that with some sugar, milk, butter, salt, some eggs, and then flour to make our overall dough. Our filling is more butter, some sugar, and obviously some cinnamon, hence cinnamon rolls. And then we'll be making a creamy cream cheese glaze. All right. The recipe is divided into multiple days, so you get a general idea. You can combine and do it all in one day. It's just going to take you a couple of hours. All right. So like I said, yeast bread takes a lot of time and care, and it's a lot of technique. So let's see how to make these fabulous cinnamon rolls. So we do make these cinnamon rolls for our Javicino event in our pastry chef class. So if you are interested in making something like this or even eating it, we will be also selling them at school when we have our pastry chef Javicino. So those, whenever we have those, that will be in our announcements and whatnot. So what we're going to do first is we're going to activate our yeast. Okay. So something different about these cinnamon rolls versus the pretzels is the pretzels was a very lean dough. It didn't have any fat. This recipe is a rich yeast bread. It has a lot of fat, butter, and egg. All right, so this is going to be more of a sweet yeast bread, where the pretzels was more of a plain lean dough yeast bread, similar to like a sandwich bread, a sourdough bread, or pizza crust, okay, or pizza dough. All right, so let's get started on activating our yeast. So we have, if you recall, we have our warm water right in our liquid measuring cup, and I'm using a liquid measuring cup just to activate it, just because it's easy. You could do it in a bowl, you can do it anything you want, but we are doing this separately. Activating our yeast or proofing our yeast is the guaranteed way that it will work. Okay, so I took sink water. It is warm, lukewarm, about 110 to 20 degrees. The next thing we're going to add is 4.5 teaspoons of yeast. So there's a lot of yeast in this recipe because the recipe calls for 7 cups of flour. And I've already done our first step of yeast bread production. I have measured all of our ingredients. Okay. So the first step is scaling all your ingredients. Now we're activating our yeast. So water, yeast, and then here's our sugar, 2 teaspoons of sugar. And this is our food for the yeast. And we're just using granulated sugar. Next thing, I'm going to take my fork and I'm just going to mix this up just to start dissolving that sugar and yeast into our water. And now we're going to wait and let it do its thing. Okay. This recipe, this dough has milk, eggs, and butter, which is what makes it a rich dough. So now we are going to prep that up. And I've already started prepping it. All right. So what we're doing here is in my saucepan, I've only put 1 cup of milk. Okay. So this is a rich dough. It has milk, where if you recall in our pretzels, it was a lean dough. So it just had water, the water that we activated the yeast in. So this has a lot more flavor, making it a rich, flavorful sweet dough or rich dough. Okay, so into our heated milk, which I've already heated, you can see the steam, I am going to add 2/3 cup of butter. Okay, so here's a 1/2 cup, which is equal to 8 tablespoons, and then 3 more tablespoons, which 11 altogether, which equals 11 tablespoons, which equals 2/3 cup of butter. Okay. You can also see it tells you right on the outside of the butter. So 11 tablespoons of butter is what you need all together. Okay. So I'm just going to add this directly to the heated milk. And what we're going to do is we're going to melt our butter. Okay. We're going to melt our butter. So the recipe calls for heated milk and heated butter or melted butter. So the best way to do this is just combine it in here. We want to make sure that our butter is completely combined or melted with that milk. It's going to help us make a nice smooth dough. All right. So we're still in, stage 2 of yeast bread production. We're making our dough. We're mixing and kneading our ingredients, but we have to prep all of our ingredients first. All right. So some recipes you see for these Cinnabons, copycat Cinnabons, they might be a little bit different. We've been making this recipe specifically at Leiden for about 15 years. So we make this every year. It's a tried and true recipe, and they taste, as long as everyone measures and makes them properly, they are delicious. All right. So I had our heat on low. So now I'm just going to take this off the heat and let that butter keep kind of doing its thing in that hot mixture, and we'll be right back. All right, we are back, and I finished melting our butter into our milk mixture, and now I'm just kind of waiting for it to cool. Now, temperature still plays a huge role with when you're making yeast bread, because if this is too hot, it's going to instantly kill our yeast, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to continue cooling it down, and I'm going to grab our bowl. All right, and we're going to start combining our wet mixture into it, which is going to be a couple of different things, okay? So first off, I did finish activating our yeast. So as you know, we had 4.5 teaspoons, 1 cup of water, and a teaspoon of sugar. The sugar is the food for the yeast, and look how much that rose, okay? So that is activated, okay? So now we are ready to start making this dough, okay? So in our bowl, I am going to combine our milk and our melted butter, okay? So I put that in first. I haven't added my yeast, okay? I'm going to cool it down a little bit. Next thing I'm going to add is 2/3 cup of sugar, okay? So in the recipe, it calls for 2/3 cup of sugar plus a teaspoon. The teaspoon is to activate the yeast. The 2/3 cup of sugar is to add to make your dough, all right? So how do you measure 2/3 cup? 1/3 twice. So 1/3 plus 1/3 equals 2/3 cup. Okay. So we're going to add that directly to our milk and butter mixture. Okay. And then I'm going to add in our salt, 2 teaspoons of salt. Salt just controls the growth and cuts down on all the sweetness of this dough. It's a very sweet, rich dough. Okay, so now we're just going to mix that up. So I'm just feeling to make sure it's not super hot, so we're good. So the next thing we're going to add in is 2 beaten eggs. So you pre-beat them, which I already did. Remember, it's always best to pre-measure. Just makes the technique go a lot faster. All right. That's another reason why you want to make sure your milk and butter is cooled down enough, because you don't want to scramble those eggs. All right. So our yeast is just thriving. So it's going to continue thriving in this warm mixture. And then our even more sugar, more warmth. Okay. So now we have our wet mixture. Okay. And we're going to add our flour. So our recipe calls for 7 cups of flour, which I'm going to add it gradually. So I'll show you what I mean. So we're just going to add in a little. So typically we would make this in a kitchen mixer, but I wanted you to see that, step by step of how to do this without the loud machine. And if you don't want to use a mixer, you can still make it. It's just going to take a little bit more time. All right, so we're going to start mixing that. So you can see we're starting to form our dough. All right, it's going to be really wet. All right, so I add a little bit more of that flour. So it calls for 7 cups, not a range. We might, depending, I add it gradually, because if it starts combining and looking really dry, then I just won't add all the flour. I mean, I don't want it to be super sticky. rich doughs, because they have all that fat, butter, sugar, egg, milk, they tend to be a little bit stickier. All right. So you can see it's coming together. I'm going to add in a little more. All right. And now it's starting to become an actual dough. So now I'm going to switch and I'm going to start using my hands to do this. All right. So you can keep going with a wooden spoon or that rubber scraper. I just feel that you can start kneading, mixing this together with your hands, and it will combine your dough. All right. So I'll be right back to show you what it looks like after I am done mixing. Okay, so as I was mixing that last batch of flour together, I realized my dough is ready for kneading. I'm probably not going to need a lot more flour. So I dumped everything out of my bowl directly onto my tabletop. And I didn't add any flour because I already had the excess flour from here. So I still probably have about a cup left. So I only used 6 cups of flour. So when you're working with yeast bread, you might not, like I said with the pretzels, you might not need all of the flour. And really, it just depends on the temperature outside and the freshness of your flour. So you just have to kind of determine you don't want it to be dry and crumbly. All right. So if I added more flour to this, it's going to be really dry and crumbly, which I don't want. If it's somewhat sticky, the more I knead it, it will firm up that gluten, which is present in my flour. And then see how it's already come together. So this kneading, taking the top and pushing, is really strengthening the gluten. And it is kind of sticky. So I'm actually just going to sprinkle down just a little bit of flour just to prevent it from being so sticky. Just like so. Any more than that, it will dry it out. So you take the top and you knead. So the recipe is asking you to do this for about 8 to 10 minutes. All right. This will help the dough rise quickly. Okay. We're going to let this dough rise for about 45 minutes to an hour at room temperature. Now there's a couple other ways that you could let this dough rise. You can put it in at school. Because we only have, limited class periods, we put it in a refrigerator and cover it in a bowl and cover it with plastic wrap. And that's called the cool rise method. And it just takes longer, but it works out perfectly for us. Here for my demo, I am doing this all in one day. So I'm just going to let this rise at room temperature. So if you have time, you can let it rise at room temperature. Okay. So there we go. All right. Just keep working that dough and you can see how well it's come together. I've put a couple sprinkles of flour on there just to prevent it from being sticky, but it's really not sticky anymore. All right, so now I'm going to take my fingers and then press in. It left my indentation, so I am good to go. Okay, so if you use a kitchen mixer, it goes very, very quickly, and you could let it the kitchen mixer will do the kneading. So I'm going to spray this with some Pam. Okay, just to prevent it from sticking. So I like to compare this to, if you go outside, you need to prevent, your skin from drying out and you put suntan lotion on. So same thing, my Pam ran out. So I'm just going to use some oil. Okay. The same thing goes for yeast bread dough. If you let it kind of just sit with no oil, no moisture on it, it's going to dry out and get crusted. You don't want it to do that. So you always use a little bit of oil, just a little bit, just to make sure that it is not getting crusty and then it has a perfect environment for it to grow. Okay. So here is my dough, my cinnamon roll dough, and it is ready to rise. We're going to let it rise for about 45 minutes to an hour. And I am just going to cover it with a towel and leave it at room temperature in a untouched area. So I'll show you what it looks like when we come back.